I am a divorce lawyer. My aunt cheated on her husband with a lumberjack. The husband was distracted on plants and did not notice it. I guess it all started when my Aunt Linda met this guy, Mark. She was in her early 50s, never married, and always busy with her job as a school principal. You know the type. Smart, hardworking, but kind of lonely. She deserved someone great. But instead, she ended up with Mark. Mark was a piece of work, mid-40s, no job, no prospects, and absolutely zero motivation to change his situation. But Aunt Linda, bless her heart, thought she saw potential. They met at some local event, and he charmed her with stories of how he was just waiting for the right opportunity. He had a way with words, I'll give him. Before we knew it, Mark had moved into her house. Rent-free, of course. He spent his days lounging around, claiming he was working on some grand business. In reality, he was just watching TV and tending to his plants. Yep, the guy was obsessed with his plants. He had this whole setup in the living room like a mini jungle. Aunt Linda let it slide, thinking it was a harmless hobby. After about a year of this nonsense, they got married. The wedding was small but nice. Aunt Linda was glowing, convinced she had found her soulmate. The honeymoon was planned for Hawaii, a dream trip she had always wanted to take. But then, just days before they were supposed to leave, Mark dropped the bombshell. "I'm not going," he said, completely deadpan. "I can't leave my plants. They need me." Aunt Linda thought he was joking. Who would skip a trip to Hawaii for some houseplants? But he was dead serious. A huge fight broke out. Linda was furious, yelling about how selfish and ridiculous he was being. Mark, cool as a cucumber, just shrugged and went back to his plants. In the end, Aunt Linda went to Hawaii with her sister. They tried to make the best of it, but it was hard for her to enjoy the trip knowing the mess she had left. When she got home, she decided she had enough. She told Mark to pack his things and leave, but Mark refused. He said he had every right to stay in his house. Aunt Linda was flabbergasted. How could this guy think he had any claim to her house? She called the police, hoping they would help her evict him. But when the cops showed up, Mark pulled a fast one. He started live streaming on Facebook, painting himself as the victim. "Look at this! I'm being trapped in my own home!" he cried, his phone camera shaking as he moved around the house, showing his precious plants and his sad face. The cops, seeing this circus, told Aunt Linda there wasn't much they could do. Legally, he had established residence, and she would have to go through the proper channels to evict him. So, Aunt Linda started the eviction process, but it was slow. Mark stayed put, tending to his plants and making her life a living hell. For 3 long months, she had to live with this guy under her roof, all the while dealing with lawyers and paper. Finally, the day came when the eviction notice was served, and Mark had to leave. Aunt Linda changed the locks, threw out his plants, and tried to move on with her life. The whole ordeal left her She couldn't believe she had let someone like Mark into her life and home. But Mark wasn't ready to let go. The man was like a bad weed, impossible to get rid of, and just kept popping up when you least expect. One night, a few days after the eviction, Aunt Linda heard a noise outside her bedroom window, peeked through the curtains, and saw Mark crouched in the bushes, looking up. She yelled out, and he took off running. Shaken, she called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was long. They took a report, but didn't seem too concerned. They said unless he actually tried to break in, there wasn't much they could do. But Mark was persistent. The next few nights, he would show up, sometimes banging on the door, demanding to be let in. Other times, he would just stand in the yard staring up at the house. Aunt Linda was terrified. She called the police each time, but they said without a direct threat or actual break-in, there was nothing they could do. It was infuriating. One morning, Aunt Linda walked outside to find Mark sleeping on her porch. She screamed, and he jumped up, looking disheveled and angry. He started yelling, saying she had ruined his life and that he just wanted his plants. She ran inside and called the police again, but once more, they were useless. They told her she could file a restraining order, but even then, it would take time to process. Things escalated from there. Mark started showing up during the day, harassing her whenever she left the house. He would follow her to work, to the grocery store, everywhere. He would shout at her, call her names, and sometimes even throw things at her car. Aunt Linda was losing her mind. She was scared to leave the house and scared to stay. The final straw came when Mark started planting his plants around her yard. One morning, she woke up to find her front yard filled with pots and planters. He had dug up her flower beds and replaced them with his own plants. It was like he was marking his territory, trying to stake his claim. Aunt Linda was beside herself. She felt like she was living in a night. She called the police again, begging for help. But they just told her the same thing. Without a direct threat, there was nothing they could do. She felt trapped. with nowhere to turn. She even thought about moving, but the thought of leaving her home, the place she had lived in for years, was heartbreaking. Aunt Linda started to break down. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and was constantly on edge. She started missing work and avoiding her friends and family. She felt like she was losing control of her life, all because of this one man. But Aunt Linda is a tough lady. She decided she wasn't going to let Mark win. She got a lawyer and filed for a restraining order. She started documenting everything, taking photos, recording his rants, and keeping detailed notes of every encounter. She fortified her house even more, adding more locks and cameras. She even got a big dog for protection. It took time. But finally, the restraining order came through. The police had no choice but to enforce it. They warned Mark that if he came near her again, he would be arrested. He tried to push his luck a few times, but Aunt Linda was ready. She called the police the moment he stepped onto her property, and they finally took him away. Mark was charged with harassment and trespassing. He spent a few weeks in jail, and when he got out, he was forbidden from coming within a mile of Aunt Linda's house. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it gave her some peace of mind. Aunt Linda slowly started to rebuild her life. She cleaned up the yard, got rid of Mark's plants, and tried to make her home feel safe. After the whole ordeal with Mark, Aunt Linda was on edge, jumpy at every little noise. She barely slept, always half expecting Mark to pop up out of nowhere, even with the restraining order in place. Just when she thought things couldn't get worse, life threw another curveball. Joseph, her new neighbor, had arrived from abroad. He was a big, burly man with a beard, who looked like he could be a lumberjack in some other life. He had moved into the house next to Aunt Linda's, and having just returned from a long trip, he spent his first couple of days settling in and catching up on chores around his property. It didn't take long for him to notice the chaos at Aunt Linda's place. The overturned flower beds, the extra locks, and the general tension. Joseph decided to wait a bit before introducing himself, thinking it was best to let the dust settle. On his third day back, he made up his mind. Early in the morning, while everything was calm, he baked a cake, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and made his way to Aunt Linda's door, hoping to start off on the right foot. When Aunt Linda heard the knocking, her heart skipped a beat. Her first thought was that Mark had found a way to come back. She stormed to the door, ready to unleash her fury, but when she yanked it open, she was met with the sight of Joseph standing there, holding a tray with cake and coffee, a gentle smile on his face. "Hi there, I'm Joseph, your new neighbor," he said, his voice deep. Aunt Linda was momentarily stunned. This was not what she had expected. She stood there, mouth slightly agape, unsure of what to say. Joseph's friendly demeanor broke through her defenses. "I thought I'd come over and introduce myself. I hope I'm not intruding." Aunt Linda hesitated, still on edge, but she managed to muster a smile. No, come in. I'm sorry. It's just been a rough few weeks." She stepped aside, letting him into the house. They sat in the kitchen, and Joseph set the tray on the table. He poured coffee into 2 mugs and offered her a slice of cake. Aunt Linda, still feeling the stress of the past weeks, decided to accept his. As they sipped their coffee, Joseph's calm presence started to ease her anxiety. "I hope I'm not being too forward," he said, taking a bite of cake. "But I couldn't help but notice things seemed a bit chaotic around here." Aunt Linda sighed, the weight of everything suddenly feeling too heavy to bear alone. "You have no idea," she said, reaching for a bottle of wine from the cabinet. She poured herself a glass and offered one to Joseph. He took it, and they clinked glasses, the wine a much-needed comfort. As the wine flowed, Aunt Linda found herself opening up more. She told Joseph about Mark, the nightmare he had put her through, and the ongoing fear she lived with every day. Joseph listened intently, his face a mix of concern and quiet anger at what she had endured. "He planted his damn plants all over my yard," Aunt Linda said, shaking her head, like he thought he still owned the place. Joseph leaned back in his chair, thinking, "That's insane. I can't believe the police didn't do more to help you." "Tell me about it," Aunt Linda replied, taking a long sip. "I felt so helpless. But now, with the restraining order, things are a bit better. Still, I'm always looking over my shoulder." Joseph nodded, his mind working. "Well, you don't have to face this alone. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. I'm right next door, and I'm more than happy to help out." Aunt Linda felt a wave of relief wash over. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she had an ally, someone who could help her reclaim her sense of security. They talked for hours, sharing stories and getting to know each other. By the time Joseph left, Aunt Linda felt lighter, as if a part of the burden had been lifted from her shoulders. That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, Aunt Linda slept soundly. She knew she had a long road ahead to fully recover from what she had been through, but with Joseph as her new neighbor and friend, she felt a renewed sense of hope and strength. Aunt Linda and Joseph's friendship grew stronger with each passing day. They started spending more time together, often meeting for coffee in the mornings and sharing dinner in the evenings. Joseph was a breath of fresh air, always positive, always ready. Aunt Linda, who had been through so much, found solace in his. She began to trust something she thought she had lost. Their bond deepened naturally. They laughed a lot, shared stories from their pasts, and supported each other in their daily lives. Joseph helped Aunt Linda with the house and yard, and she, in turn, helped him adjust to his new life in the neighborhood. They became inseparable, each finding comfort in the other's presence. One evening, after a particularly lovely dinner, Joseph took Aunt Linda's hand and looked into her eyes. "Linda, these past months with you have been incredible. I feel like I've found something I didn't even know I was looking." Aunt Linda smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. "I feel the same, Joseph. You've brought so much joy and stability into my life. I don't know what I would have done without you." Without realizing it, they had started dating. It was as if their hearts had planned it all along, moving them closer together with each shared moment. They began going out on more official dates, dinners, movies, and walks in the park. They enjoyed simple pleasures, relishing the newfound happiness they had found in each other. One sunny afternoon, Joseph suggested a picnic in the local park. He brought along a basket filled with delicious homemade food and a bottle of wine. They sat on a blanket under the shade of a large oak tree, laughing and talking. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over everything, Joseph reached into the basket and pulled out a small box. "Linda," he began, his voice full of, "meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me. I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you." He opened the box to reveal a beautiful, "Will you marry me?" Aunt Linda's eyes filled with tears of joy. "Yes, Joseph, I will!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him. It felt like a scene from a movie, too perfect to be real, yet it was happening. Their wedding was a small, intimate, attended by close family and friends. It was held in the backyard of Aunt Linda's house, the very place where they had faced so many challenges together. It felt right, like they were closing one chapter and opening a new, brighter one. As they exchanged vows, there was a sense of destiny. It was as if all the trials and tribulations had been leading to this moment, guiding Aunt Linda to the man she was truly meant to be with. Joseph was everything Mark wasn't: kind, reliable, and genuinely loving. Their life together blossomed. Aunt Linda was no longer the stressed, anxious woman she had been. She radiated happiness and content. Joseph's presence had a calming, stabilizing effect on her, and their home became a place of joy and laughter. I watched as my aunt transformed before my eyes, becoming the vibrant, confident woman I always knew she could be. She and Joseph made an incredible team, facing life's challenges together with a sense of humor and unwavering support for one another. Seeing them together, I couldn't help but believe that some things are meant to be. Aunt Linda's journey had been tough, but it led her to Joseph, and in him, she found true love and happiness. It's funny how life works out sometimes. What seemed like a series of unfortunate events turned out to be the path to something wonderful. I'm incredibly grateful to see my aunt so happy, thriving in her new life with Joseph. They've taught me that sometimes you have to go through the storm to find the rainbow on the other side. And for Aunt Linda, that rainbow was Joseph, her true partner, and the love of her life.